I'm back. Mr. Clark's back. Time to take a look at 11.3 European Conquest in the Americas. So, again, as we go through, you'll be writing down and responding to each of the questions as best you can as we go through. Kind of think about the responses before I even go through them. That way, you can kind of get an indication of what you do and do not really understand well. And of course, I'll clarify each of the topics as we go through. So, the objectives for today's lesson, we're going to analyze the results of the very first encounters between the Spanish and Native Americans. We'll explain how the Aztec and Incan empires were impacted by Spanish conquistadors and European colonization. We'll describe how Portugal and other European nations challenged Spanish power. And we'll analyze the major features of Spanish colonial government, society, and culture. Eventually, we'll describe the impact of Spanish colonization on the Americas. Okay, part one, first encounters. Question one: why did Spain send conquistadors to America in the 1500s? Well, when you look at the word first, conquistador, you see the root of the word conquest, or you can at least kind of visualize that. And that's basically what they were. They were conquerors, or people who were looking to conquest in a particular area. So when you look there, the Spanish sent over the conquistadors to conquer more land, to find wealth, in particular in the form of gold, and also the God aspect to convert Native Americans to Christianity. So when we think about the Spanish, they were a Catholic country and an empire that wanted to see Catholicism spread around the globe. Two, why did the Spanish conquistadors have such an advantage over the Native Americans? To kind of think logically why the conquistadors would have an advantage. So technology wise, they had guns. They also had horses. In fact, they were the ones to introduce horses into the Americas. They had protective armor, and they carried with them, and they didn't even know this when they came, disease that was fatal to the natives. A lot of these diseases that they brought over, and they actually nicknamed them white man's disease because these were diseases that Europeans had built up natural immunity to over the course of many generations. But when they came into the Americas, the Native Americans were exposed for the very first time, and this wiped out a good percentage of their populations. It's very similar to if you go to, let's say, Mexico, and they say don't drink the water. That's because there are impurities in the water. Here in the United States, we purify and filter our water at a very different level than the Mexicans do. And as a result, some of the bacteria in the water that they are immune to in Mexico, we would get very ill from in Mexico. Three, how did the Spanish treat Native Americans they encountered? Well, the very first, they treated them friendly. They want to kind of almost lull them into a false sense of security. But over the course of time, they began to attack and murder the natives, take whatever resources and gold they wished, and as a result, they began to exploit the Native Americans for their own gain. Question number four, as we move into Cortez, as he's conquering the Aztecs, who was one of the very first Spanish conquistadors to invade what is now Mexico. And you can guess based on my already alluding to Cortez, it's Hernan or Hernando Cortez. You can see it both ways. Hernan is just short for Hernando. You can look at the map there. Cortez's route in 1519. You can see he stayed very narrowly along the coastal regions there. The land kind of gave him a navigational point, hitting Havana and Cuba first, and then heading up on the Yucatan Peninsula and into more of the interior regions of Mexico, eventually getting to Tenochtitlan, which is now today modern-day Mexico City, or the capital of Mexico. Five, what large Native American empire dominated much of Mexico when Cortez arrived? And that was the Aztec Empire, led by Montezuma. And we can see Montezuma spelled a couple different ways in the book and in readings and such. Montezuma is how you say it. And he was the emperor of the Aztec Empire. Six, why did Excuse me. Why was Cortez able to defeat the massive Aztec Empire with only 600 conquistadors? Again, this goes back to what we mentioned before. The Spanish had the advanced weapons. They had created even alliances with some of the Native American tribes there that had disliked the Aztecs. He captured Montezuma and gained control over the empire. You can see the images here of Cortez and his men who were welcomed at different points in time. See Cortez on horseback. The fact that they were on horseback, too, was something that was unusual for the Aztecs and something that they found kind of unique and somewhat intimidating as well. Another empire was the Inca Empire. The Inca are located along the western coast of South America, and you can see some of it there in the orange color. And the three great Native American empires are the Aztecs, the Inca, and the Mayans. 8. Why did the Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro invade the Inca Empire? Same basic premise. Wealth is the key reason behind any of the invasions here. Profit's sake, still motivates people, hundreds of years after this initial invasion here in the Americas. 9. As more European nations saw gold and wealth pouring out of the Americas, how did they try to benefit themselves? They sent privateers or pirates to raid Spanish ships. They sent explorers to search further into North America for resources. Next, we'll look at how the Spanish attempted to control the Americas. They sent in viceroys. These are local rulers sent in by the king to control large areas. They sent in missions or missionaries to build church fortifications and to convert the locals to Christianity. The imagery you see there now, wherever the Spanish established colonies in the Americas, missionaries sought to convert the Native Americans to Christianity. In many ways, Christianity and the spreading Catholicism into the region was their second goal behind the wealth motivation into the Americas. 11. How did the Incomienda system treat Native Americans? Anytime you think about how Native Americans are treated, you could automatically assume it's not going to be well. The Encomienda system was basically a forced slave labor system for Native Americans. It allowed for the brutal treatment and terrible working conditions to be established for Native Americans. 12. Where the Spanish find another source of labor to meet the growing demand to mine for gold and silver beyond the enslavement of Native Americans. They began bringing in African slaves into the Americas, enslaving the Africans and forcing them to work for them. As generations passed by and decades became centuries, new social groups emerged in Spanish America, and they developed a distinctive class system. And we'll look at each of these different classes here. So we'll look here at the Peninsulares. These are people born in Spain but lived in the Americas. They are at the top of the pyramid, the highest class. The Creoles were Spanish descendants but born in America. They owned many of the plantations and mines. So basically, the Peninsulares and Creoles are at the very top here, kind of just one slightly above the other. And then the others are down in the middle to the bottom. The Mestizos, these are people of mixed European and Native American ancestry. The Mulattoes were people of mixed African and European descent. Native Americans are the original inhabitants in the Americas. the indigenous people. And then the peons were those who were enslaved through the Incomienda system. A little bit of visual here to help you see it a little bit better. So the Peninsulares are basically the Spanish aristocrats. The Creoles, and you see different spellings, are the descendants of the Peninsulares. The Mestizos are Caucasians and Indian natives. Mulattoes are Caucasians and Africans. Then you have the Native Americans and also the African slaves. How did the Spanish exploration and colonization impact much of the world, which is your lesson reflection here. You can use the chart above there to kind of help you a little bit there. So much of the world was now connected through extensive trade networks. Spain became the most powerful empire in the world, at least temporarily. Millions of Native Americans would die from disease and warfare. You can even see there the horrifying numbers in the early 1500s before the Europeans engaged with the Native Americans. They were roughly around 25 million strong in the earlier 1500s. And then by the later 1500s into the 1600s, they were under 4 million. Just a shocking, almost indirect genocide of 25 million Native Americans. Many of the millions of Native Americans, they would die from disease and warfare. And there was a race for massive colonization by Europeans throughout the New World. Hopefully you enjoyed our discussion here today. And until next time, Mr. Clarke is